Okay guys, time for another One Piece chapter discussion. This time it is chapter 1063, titled The Only Family I've Got. Oda seems to be on a tear, just ripping his way through this new arc, giving us so much stuff going on all over the world, and I am living for it. Let's talk about the cover story. So this is volume 21 of this cover story series, which is Germa 66's Cold-Blooded Voyage. This scene again is a frozen over Chocolate Town. We see Cracker completely frozen, reaching out, trying to clearly save someone who we can see immediately is Pudding, right? We see Brûlée crying. It doesn't look like she's frozen over. She was probably in the mirror world, popped out to try to help, and Pudding was already taken. So this is what I said last time, was that I thought that it was going to be because of Pudding that Aokiji and whoever were sent here, because Oda's very deliberate with these things, and when he shows a location, like back when he showed the sake cups and there were 3 sake cups, that was before Sabo got introduced as current 20-something-year-old Sabo, not child Sabo, right? So all those kind of things are very deliberate, and I'm sure there's been more hints at this that we just didn't pick up on or whatever, but I think this is pretty interesting that we're finally coming back to Pudding, because after we left Whole Cake Island, that was kind of the last we heard of the Three-Eyed People, and we know that they might be carriers of the voice of all things, or at least supposedly they are. The voice of all things, of course, being something that Oda has dropped a couple times throughout the story, talking about Luffy, talking about Momonosuke, talking about Roger, but not exactly explaining how those powers worked. Like when we were back in Wano and Zunisha and Momonosuke were speaking to each other, it was kind of unclear how exactly that worked. Same with Luffy, he was able to project his aura or essence as a person to other people for them to find him, which I would assume that's part of the voice of all things, but it hasn't really been talked about in clear terms by any characters yet. We haven't had a character that is explicitly going to tell us, yes, the voice of all things, it works like this. You know, people can activate it using whatever reason and hockey or whatever, some shit like that, right? But it hasn't actually been explicitly said. So we know Roger had it. We pretty sure that Momonosuke has a somewhat advanced form of it, whether that's because he's a Kozuki or if it's just because he just has it innately, like some people are just born with it, like with Conqueror's Haki and whatnot. But the Three-Eyed People, I think, are going to come into the story very soon, at least like in a flashback or something, because we are coming to a close, and that's one of the races that we still haven't really learned much about. I think we can safely assume now that the events are so close in the timeline in the cover story to what they are in the current story that Kuzan is going to be making his way back into the story pretty soon. I think this is like the first time where the cover story has been like a direct connection to what's going on currently and how close in proximity the timeline is. But I'm interested to see what exactly Kuzan's plan is, because I know what I think right now has to do with the Punk Hazard fight between Kuzan and Sakazuki, because when that happened, I think that was kind of his either I win this or I'm done, and I think him knowing that Sakazuki was going to be the head of the Marines at that point made him kind of say, you know what, I've been dealing with this corruption for a really long time. I've been letting a lot of shit slide that really wasn't okay. And keep in mind that back in Ohara, Sakazuki was the one who murdered all the fucking innocent people in Ohara, and Kuzan was like, geez, what the fuck? Like, that's not cool. Why did that crazy asshole do that? So he's known Sakazuki for a very long time and known the extent of how evil and corrupt a person he is and how much he's willing to overlook to cover his own ass and cover the ass of the world government. And I think he's honestly just had enough, and this whole escapade with him following Blackbeard and stuff, I think it's probably because he wants to get the Void 100-Year knowledge. I think he wants to learn the history of the world, wants to learn the origins of the world government, because he's seen so much shit, he's had to deal with so much shit, I'm sure, and I think he just wants answers so he can decide where he's gonna side. And I think he could potentially be a really powerful ally for the Straw Hats, or at least the revolutionaries, or some kind of opposing force to the world government at this point, because I don't see a different trajectory for him. I genuinely don't think that he's doing this because he likes Blackbeard and he just stopped giving a shit entirely. I think he's doing this very calculated, and I think he just wants answers and wants to know the truth, and he's like, I'm not a Marine anymore, I can finally actually act on my own morality, and I think this is probably going to end up leading him to the revolutionaries at some point. But yeah, Pudding was kidnapped, and we know Aokiji was involved with that, so hopefully we learn some stuff about them and see them real soon. So let's move on to the actual chapter. So we start out this chapter with Luffy's group, which is of course Luffy, Jinbei, Chopper, and Bonnie at the moment because they got split off from the rest of the Straw Hats earlier on and picked up Bonnie. It's nice that we finally get to see Luffy interacting with Bonnie and see some moments like we got to see with some of the other Worst Generation members. So we open up with this scene where Luffy, Bonnie, and Chopper are completely bloated and full stuffed, and Luffy's like, what's keeping everybody? And Chopper, being Chopper, is like, oh, I bet they'll love the food machine, except maybe Sanji. And then Atlas is commenting on how chubby and bloated they all are. Man, you guys can eat. Like, all of you have these bulging bellies. And then Jinbei, of course, is like, nope. Mine was already like that. Just a big dude. And then we see this cute little robot dog in the bottom of the panel. And this little robot dog is apparently like a recycling dog robot thing that just eats up all of the garbage and recycles it. And I think this is like kind of a testament just to show how advanced Vegapunk really is. Like, we've been told his brain is like 500 years in the future pretty much because he's just so smart. And you know, he has a little dog that just eats up garbage and recycles it. So, I mean, and then we also have Atlas saying, if I don't run riot, no one will, which kind of gives us an indication that Atlas being like super aggro and punching stuff is most likely to test everything, because Vegapunk wouldn't want something that's not functional, and she's probably the punk satellite that is mostly for testing out how strong and the endurance of different things and prototypes, and she's probably there to make sure everything works well. That way, if it doesn't, Vegapunk can make tweaks where needed. Now, I think these next couple of panels that Oda threw in here that seem super casual and like passerby panels, I think they're actually super important. If you remember way back when Enel had his cover story series, he went on the moon and saw all of these little teeny robot dudes and saw all of this like ancient artwork of this super advanced stuff. And I think we can make the assumption that these are probably connected. Whether they are the little people that were on the moon, or like descendants, or connected, or Vegapunk or somebody Vegapunk worked with or studied with or something made these, because we don't see their faces. I think that's pretty important to note, that we do not see their faces. Anytime Oda doesn't show us a face, it's for a reason. And Chopper asks, who are they? And Bonnie says, I think it's safe to assume they're lab assistants of some kind. And that's it. We just accept that they exist, don't see their faces, don't get any further information about them. And given the fact that, like, this Moon Society, or at least the artwork and all of the little robots that Enel made contact with, are so far advanced, even beyond what we see with a lot of the current stuff, I think we can assume there's some kind of connection to Vegapunk, and that these little tiny people have to do with Vegapunk. And then there's also different stuff listed on them. We can't really make out all of it, but one of them says patrology, one of them I think says linguistics, but we can't see the whole thing. It's just the Lingu and maybe an I. I would assume it says linguistics because we don't see the full head. And then we have one that says history and another one that I really can't make out. And I think it's safe to assume that they're connected. And if they're not, then I'm way off. But I really think that this is going to tie into that email panel and cover story series, because Oda will usually tie things back in at a later point after we've long since forgotten, and then we're like, oh my god, Oda, you set this up so long ago! Because that's just what he does, right? But I really think that this is the connection, because that cover story series never really came back into play, if you think about it. After Enel went up there and we saw that information never really tied into anything. And Oda is not somebody who does that kind of stuff for no reason. It's not just for fun, even though it was fun. But I think that this is going to tie back in. So just think it's interesting that we see any kind of life form, humanoid people or anything here at all, because Jinbei notes that it seemed deserted, and he thinks they might have been hiding because of these strangers. But I don't know whether Egghead is an actual island or if it's just a gigantic laboratory. It's hard to say at this point since we've only seen what Luffy and friends have seen. We haven't seen Nami's group and what path they're going to go through yet, so maybe we'll get a little bit more clarification when we catch up with the other part of the Straw Hats. And then Bonnie turns to see Luffy and is saying, like, isn't it a little hot for those outfits? And we see, like, a cloud, and we see Luffy coming out of the cloud, look like just puff of air or whatever, in this, like, super, super sci-fi looking outfit. He's got one of those communication things on his ear, that antenna that we saw in some of the other satellites that we've seen. And he's wearing, like, this long, like, cloak, hoodie jacket type thing, and gloves, and then these funky space looking boots. And he's saying that these clothes feel super light and breezy, and he shows where he got them from, and it just says fashion, and it's like this, like, looks like it's almost like on a spaceship, the door. So Bonnie is like, oh, free clothes, like, nothing beats free clothes and free food, and she's, like, looking at the machine. There's, like, all these different buttons to press, and apparently the machine, like, undresses you, probably, like, sprays you with some kind of, like, disinfecting thing, I would imagine, and just, like, sterilizes you or whatever, and then, so that you're, like, nice and fresh, and then puts new clothes on, because there's, like, a poof, and I don't think the poof is just, you know, so we don't see stuff, because Luffy's had the poof too, so I would imagine it's just, like, a fog or something that it hits you with, and then you get the new clothes. And so Luffy is in his outfit, and then Bonnie is in, like, a little battle suit looking thing, where hers is kind of like a leotard almost, and then she's got the fancy boots too, and they're like super sci-fi looking. Chopper is in a very similar outfit to Luffy, but then his is like almost like a little helmet. Like he's got like a little spaceman helmet on with little goggles and stuff. And then Jinbei rocking the Hawaiian shirt. And he's saying how these probably would have made really good disguises, but it's a little too late for that at this point. So he's just rocking his little Hawaiian shirt, being the token adult in the group with a bunch of children and technical adults that are really just giant children. So Bonnie is getting ready to leave at this point. She's like, alright, I'm gonna go grab some weapons to go deal with Vegapunk, and I'll catch you guys later. And Luffy's like, wait, heads up, it's Kuma. Is it just me, or is he looking for us? And if you look, he hasn't even made any headway near them yet. He's like pretty far away from them. So this is Oda kind of showing us Luffy's like Kenbunshoku haki, or like observation haki, is super, super fine-tuned at this point. Like, when he was fighting Katakuri back on Whole Cake Island, he had to really, really concentrate just to keep up, because Katakuri's was a lot more fine-tuned than Luffy's is. And at this point, it's probably just as good as Katakuri's, if not stronger. And again, Oda continues showing us just how fine-tuned the observation haki is. And he's like, he's gonna charge in before he even charges in. He's gonna fire his laser beam before he even fires the laser beam. And then we see them running. And then the Kuma or Pacifista, I would assume, is like probably in some super robotic voice. Provisions and garments reported stolen. Thieves detected. And they're like, wait, that wasn't free. And then we see Bonnie. And like, I don't know, as soon as I saw Bonnie's face, I was like, ooh, some heartbreaking stuff's about to happen. I'm about to be real sad, maybe even cry. Because she just looks absolutely terrified. Like, the happiness, goofiness of, haha, free clothes, free food, like, this is pretty cool. She is just, like, frozen. Absolutely frozen. And I think we can assume that this Pacifista version of Kuma is a lot stronger than the one that we saw, or the ones that we saw back at Sabaody pre- and post-time skip. Because even though Luffy has really fine-tuned Kimochoku Haki, he's still getting his ass thrown around by this thing. Just because he knows the attacks are happening doesn't mean he can dodge them, because they're so quick and so powerful. And we see Jinbei, Chopper, and Luffy kind of like, why did this thing just pop out? Like, the damage he's causing is way worse than us stealing some stuff. And they're like, is he gonna kill us? Like, this is, I guess we're gonna have to deal with him. And as soon as Luffy is like powering up that, you know, Giganta pistol, Gomu, and then he's going to punch it, and then Bonnie kicks him and knocks him back, and he shoots at them and is like blowing shit up, and he's like, Bonnie, like, what are you doing? Like, he has lasers. Did you not see his lasers? Like, I gotta take care of this. And then the heartbreaking scene that I thought was gonna happen happens. And Bonnie finally is like recollecting herself after she kicks Luffy out of the way. And she's like, that's my father. And is like starting to cry. And I thought that Jinbei had figured out and made the connection because of Kuma and Vegapunk. But apparently not, because he is just as surprised as Chopper and Luffy when they're like, what? And she's saying, yeah, he's the only family I've got. And they say, you know, when you said your dad was turned into a cyborg, you were talking about Kuma? And then the tears really start coming before we get to the next panel, because we see the wavy writing telling us that she's like starting to get really hysterical. And then we see this like absolutely heartbreaking panel. Please don't hurt my daddy. And we see this one little like background panel to the main part of it, where it's like a young Kuma smiling with an itty bitty baby Bonnie, and she's just completely sobbing, breaking down, a lot like Robin and Enies Lobby and Nami at Arlong Park. Kind of similar feel and vibe, with just this poor girl, like, she must be going through so much trauma with this whole experience, because like, this has been going on for years, and she is just like a fucking mess and almost reverting to like a panicked child, like, don't hurt my daddy, I'm scared, like, oh my god. And like, my heart breaks for poor Bonnie. Like, I've been so excited to meet her, and I knew we were gonna have some heavy shit with her, because if she was connected to Kuma, it was gonna be rough, right? Because we saw the state of Kuma, and it's not pretty. And Luffy's like, you dummy, like, you gotta get out of here, this is just a pacifista. And we see Luffy running to go knock Bonnie out of the way or protect her with Haki or something. And then we see just how much of a fucking explosion this pacifista version can make, because looks like he blew up a big chunk of the island just from the last panel, and that's where we leave the Straw Hats. Then we make and shift towards another chunk. Now we're in the next segment, which is a certain sea in the New World. And there's Blackbeard's ship, and of course the Z ha 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 ha, right? So we know it's Blackbeard. And then the next panel, it's no good captain, and it's Law's ship. Underwater, he's clearly getting shot at, and you see one of his people trying to plug a hole, has his arms over the hole and water gushing in, and Law's telling them, like, another hit like that and the water pressure's gonna crush us, like, we need to surface, we won't be able to escape. There's land north, like, the east of here, like, let's go. And then we get Lady Law. So this panel, we get a woman version of Law and all of his crew members, and it kind of is just a reminder of the fact that, like, Law is the only useful person on his entire crew. Like, he's a swordsman, he's the captain, he's the doctor, and, like, all of his crew are just a bunch of bumbling idiots that he just, like, has a soft spot for, and they're like, Captain, you're so cute now, and he's like, do you want to fucking die? Like, come on, like, get your shit together, like, we have to get through this shit. And it really makes me wonder, because this Lady Law drawing came back from an SBS way, way, way back, right? So it makes me wonder, because we saw the child versions of people became relevant to the story. How many questions has Oda specifically answered as, like, hints for things that were gonna happen later on? Like, how many times has Oda done this? Like, I want to kind of go back through the SBSs and look if there's anything else that might come into play, because this is insane how much stuff lately has been coming in that were, like, things he drew up in SBS. Like, that's crazy. But apparently, this is some kind of infection, and all of Law's crew has been infected, and it's contagious, and it was done to disorient them, and Law's like, okay, well, like, our fighting with the emperors, like, my clashing with the emperors taught me a lot about Haki, and that Haki can be used to kind of outpower different devil fruits as kind of a countermeasure. And we see Law using Haki to change back to a male body instead of the female body that he was transformed into. And I think it's interesting that we see, like, bursts of lightning coming off of him. I think we're gonna find out that Law has conquerors, and I think there's probably a lot of characters that are gonna get revealed to have conquerors, that Oda has been putting little hints like this that we could easily interpret as Law is just furious, and maybe it's just really, really strong armament Haki. But I don't know, I have a feeling Law probably has conquerors, especially because he has the Will of D. But we see him transforming, and then we see Blackbeard's crew, and Blackbeard is on top of some horse thing, and we see apparently this is Doc Q's fruit, the sick fruit, and Doc Q can make any kind of disease that he feels like making, which means all of those stupid diseases that Usopp has, like, I can't go into this island disease, and I can't fight whoever disease, like, that might actually come into play. Like, Oda might actually make those real things because of Doc Q's fruit. And he apparently called this one, at least the English translation is the Milady Transformation Plague, which is kind of insane. And we also kind of see that all of the fruits that Blackbeard's crew has been collecting are stacked. So I'm going to list the fruits in just a second, but I think that this means that Blackbeard's plan was always to go after the One Piece, and always to be aiming for that as his final goal, and that before he did that, he had a specific set of devil fruits that he wanted, or at least had an idea of which kinds that he wanted, and went out and got all of those with all of the new connections he had, first as a warlord, and now as an emperor, right, as a Yonko. So he was able to get all these crazy fruits. So some of the new fruits we see now are Doc Q's sick fruit, which can create plagues. Van Augur now has the warp fruit. This warp fruit is probably how they've been able to accomplish a lot. Now that they have this fruit, they can just send people places and maybe send them back, I'm not sure. And then Burgess now has this crazy buff fruit, which just makes him even stronger than he already was, which means that he did not have this fruit during Dressrosa because he fell into the water and didn't drown, right? And I think we would have known if he had this fruit because it kind of probably would have changed the outcome of some stuff. But so they all have these crazy stacked fruits, and Law's even saying like these guys have been hunting these devil fruits and they're all crazy strong. Like, these are insane devil fruits. And he starts fighting with Blackbeard and is like, Blackbeard comes down on a fucking Pegasus. And he's like, oh, it's been a while, Law, hasn't it? And he's like, what do you want, Blackbeard? Like, what do you want? And he's already has like a sword drawn, he's getting ready to fight. And Blackbeard's like, oh, is that a way to speak to another member of the worst generation? Well, I knew one of you, either you, Luffy, or Kid, would end up here, so I've just been waiting to see which one of you would show up. And we see that he's actually riding Stronger, one of his crewmates, who apparently has the mythical horse Zoan fruit model Pegasus, which kind of looks like the horse bird thing that we saw back in Skypiea, but that was not a Pegasus Zoan. It was either a bird that ate a horse or a horse that ate a bird. I don't remember which. But he's like, you know, Kaido had one, didn't he? How many poneglyph rubbings do you have now, Law? I'll take them off your hands. And Law just smirks. He's like, you took the words right out of my mouth. Let's settle this then. Winner takes all. And that's how we end the chapter. Honestly, I don't see this going well because Law is very strong, and I think he would be able to go at it with Blackbeard for a little while by himself, but he cannot take down Blackbeard's entire crew. His crew is pretty much useless. Bepo might be able to fight since he is a mink, and mink do have the Sulong form, but that's very situational, and I don't think it's going to come into play here. I don't know if Oda will kill Law. I really don't. I'm worried for him because we haven't lost a fan favorite character in quite some time that was well loved as much as Law is. I don't think this is going to be a pretty fight. I really hope Law doesn't die, but honestly, I'm kind of worried. Okay, well that is it for this chapter. Thanks for watching if you did. See you in the next chapter. Bye.